Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This is Qaisar Hayat, lecturer, Department of English, Kohat University of Science and Technology. Dear student, Assalamu alaikum. We are studying English Code 102 and this is the fourth lecture of our course Introduction to Linguistics. Student, the topic for today's class is linguistic in detail. Linguistic is a topic. Linguistic is sometimes studied solely, sometimes with respect to other phenomena, other discipline, other subject. So this topic is one way, a revision for you that most of the stuff that I have presented here, most of the topic that I have brought here would be new for you, but for some extent, some topic would act as a revision for you. So let's see what is included in our discussion agenda for today's class, and that is linguistic in depth or linguistic in detail. First of all, we shall revise the term linguistic. We shall define linguistic in many ways. With different angles, we shall see what is linguistic. After knowing our area, the next topic for our today's class is the scope of linguistic. What is the scope of linguistic? And as per scope, where linguistic stands. Next is different branches of linguistic, how these branches are in order, and how these branches of linguistic would be studied and approached. Type of linguistic, how many types of linguistic there are, and how these topic and types would be studied. If there are some fields of linguistic, what are these? We shall try to know about the different fields of linguistic. Then, why linguistic is studied? Why study linguistic? Why linguistic is important to be studied? Why do we study linguistic? What are the requirements? What are the demands to study linguistic thoroughly? After this, there is another area that we have to study in our class, and that is career in linguistic. What type of career we have to study, and some famous linguists. It's very necessary to be introduced with some great names who have given their lives to linguistics, who have thoroughly studied linguistics, who have given us different theories, philosophies about linguistics, and in one way or another, we the student of linguistics are thankful to them. Dear student, let's start with the definition that what is linguistic. Linguistic, to put it simply, is the study of language, but in a scientific way. As we already discussed this definition, that linguistic is actually the study of language or the study of languages. When a language is studied, different phenomena, different aspects, different details of the language are brought under studies. So, but these studies that we have carried out with respect to language must be scientific, because linguistic is a science. So, if these aspects that we have studied in language are scientific, the whole process that we have done or we are doing is linguistic. In short, Without any extra addition, I can say that linguistic is a science of language. Linguistic is when we study a language scientifically. Another part of the definition is that this means not just looking at the meaning of word in a language, but at how the language is formed, the context it is used, and much more. Dear student, I have included this 2 lines definition in the main definition because most of my students ask me a question, and that is, sir, what scientific means? How language be scientific? And how the definition that linguistic is the scientific study of language can be fulfilled. So this part of my definition can satisfy their question. That looking at the meaning of word, for example, when you say some word and you are saying to someone, why the person listening your word understand. So student, honestly speaking, do you not think that science is involved? Yes, thinking on word, bearing some meaning, looks scientific. And who is the person who has joined meaning with the word? Not scientific? Yes, scientific. So these type of questions, when asked, when replied, when given, definitely it remain in the circle of science. So study of language, as I have given you example, that meaning of word, how the language is formed. Student, how language is formed? The language we are enjoying right now. English language, I am speaking now. English language, you are taking your lecture in. But let's go nearer to our local languages. And that is, for example, Punjabi language. For example, Pashto language. Student, have you ever think that who given you this language? Do you ever think? Yourself? Your parents? This society? Or if I change my question, that how the language as it is reached to you? What is your answer? Yes, from mouth to mouth, from brain to brain, or how? Or if my question is that what are you doing for the language? Nothing, just speaking it or doing something more. Being linguist, you are contributing a lot into language. But as a common man even, we are transmitting the language to the next generation. We are talking to our new generation. Our kids are asking us. We are interacting with them. So doing what? We are transforming our knowledge of language to them. It's not necessary that a chemistry teacher is transforming the knowledge of chemistry to the student. Definitely, a chemistry sir who is speaking English is transforming the language to the next generation too. So everybody in a common way, in a specific way, is transforming a language. So everybody is taking the language scientifically because the scientific study is called linguistic. And how language is taught, how language is transferred to the next generation, when language die. Student, my question to you is, let me know when a language die. But first you satisfy yourself that our language really die. You are not confirmed that listen. Then when the last speaker of a language dies, the language also dies. So science is involved. Scientific relation is there. So language can be. So the conclusion is that yes, language can be spoken scientifically. So that's called linguistic. After the definition, what is the scope of linguistic? Student, linguistics involve a vast, complex and systematic study with different core areas such as phonology, phonetics, morphology, syntax and semantics. Student, we have already learned that linguistic is a vast phenomenon. There is phonology, the voice function, there is morphology, the word formation, there is syntax, the order of the word in sentence, and semantics, the meaning. So, linguistic is very vast. Linguistic is also intertwined with various other disciplines and contain fields like sociolinguistic, psycholinguistic. Student, where do we speak language? We speak language with the people. So where do the people live? The people live in society. So we are speaking language in society. If we are using language in society, definitely society performs different functions through language. So when we study the language with respect to society, that is called sociolinguistic. And how language is taught, how language is learned, that is psycholinguistic. How human brain and mind is involved in language and linguistic, that is called psycholinguistic. So different theories are devised. So the scope of linguistic is very vast. Somewhere we take it individually. Most of the time we take it in society as a sociolinguistic. Whenever there is a field of learning and teaching, then definitely linguistic is psycholinguistic. Now the scope. Linguistic, unlike past ages, is being recognized as an independent discipline of study, thus paving the way to a lot of development and research. Student, linguistic is descriptive study and not a prescriptive one and descriptive language. So, in all aspects, it is a subject that keeps change as language change. Student, language is descriptive. It accepts changes. Language change. Have you ever observed that Pashto spoken in different part of KPK is different from one another? The spoken English of Kharak is a bit different from English spoken in Peshawar. So the language change. With distances, the language change. With region, the language change. Different aspect of their that vasten the scope of linguistic, that language change is there. Studied the hierarchy of language. First, phoneme, voice. Maybe in earlier ages when human was living in cavage, the voices were delivered and that were understood too. So in hierarchy, the first one is phoneme, voice. Then there is some up and down or syllable in voice. Then morpheme of words. Words are made, but after morphemes of words, the full words that are there. So before words, there is some voice, then syllable, and then morpheme. When joined together, the basic unit, the first brick of the great building of language is made. When words are made, the work is easy now. After words, there is phrase. What is phrase? Phrase is actually sense, joining words with a sense, but the sense is not complete. After phrase, there are clauses. Clauses are having subject and predicate. Then there are sentences, and when there are sentences, there are utterances. Then there are utterances, sentences, definitely there are speech and text. When speech and text are there is discourse, language and context. So this is the journey that we start from phoneme and that we end at the discourse, because language is made, but when taken in different contexts, that is discourse. So dear student, this was the hierarchy of language. Then there are some types of linguistic. Linguistic types are very necessary to be known. Student, theoretical linguistic. Theoretical linguistic actually studies the nature of language as it is and analyzes the properties and process. It is aimed at learning behavior and feature of language. Student, theoretical linguistic actually give you information about behavior and different feature of language. Now, descriptive linguistic. This is a study of particular language and language families from both historical and synchronic point of view. Student, as I have already informed you about the status of linguistic, that language is actually descriptive. Here I mean that both with respect to historical point of view as well as synchronic. Synchronized with the present time, both type of qualities are there in language. So this type of linguistic knowledge that cover particular language and language families from both historical as well as synchronic point of view is called descriptive linguistic, and that is the type of linguistic. After these two types, there is another type of linguistic that is called historical linguistic. Historical linguistic is actually a study of the pattern of change of language over time. Student, do you believe that language change? If yes, what is the speed of change? How much time it required to completely change? How much time it required to be slightly changed? And so on. Historical linguistic tell us that how a language was in 16th century, how a language was in 14th century, and how over the time it changed. What is the change? Are the words totally changed or little change is observed? These type of questions are replied in historical linguistic. Historical linguistic is a type of linguistic that tell us about the pattern of change of a language over the time. So, there are some more types, and that is sociolinguistic. Student, this is the branch of linguistic that studies the relation between society and language. Student, as I have given you already an example, that language is spoken in society. So the function of language can be seen through the mirror of society. How in society we perform different functions with the help of language. So when language is studied with respect to society, that is called sociolinguistic. Sociolinguistic is a branch of linguistic that study the relation between society and language. After sociolinguistic, there is dialectology. Student, dialectology is derived from dialect, which is a variety of speaking a language. The study of deviation of one language into another is called dialectology. What is dialect? For understanding dialectology, student, you have to understand what is dialect. Dialect is actually the variety in a language. For example, if we are speaking Pashto language, but there is another group that speak the same language, but the dialect is a bit different. The deliveries of the words is a bit different. The accent is a bit different. So that is another dialect. So dialect can be changed, but when a dialect is not understood by any group, then language come into being. So dialect is up to spoken form. When language have written formation of different dialect and totally different dialect, one dialect is not understood by the other, then that won't be called a dialect, then it will be called a language, a separate language. Now, applied linguistic. Student, we have already taken a lecture on applied linguistic. Applied linguistic is a study of practical application of language studies such as translation and speech therapy. Applied linguistic actually language and the theories on language are applied. So the application of language is called applied linguistic. Now, field of linguistic. Student, there are different fields of linguistic. Now, computational linguistic. Computational linguistic actually studies natural language from a computational aspect. Student, when natural language are seen through the glasses of computational aspect, that is called computational linguistic. Neurolinguistic. Neurolinguistic actual studies the biological basis of language and its development. Neurolinguistic actually give you information about the biological change, biological process of a language, and if biologically dealt one way, how language developed into another way. Neurolinguistic help us to understand a language with respect to its biological aspect and the development of a language that totally based on neurological aspect come under and understood under the umbrella term neurolinguistic. After neurolinguistic, there is mathematical linguistic. Student, do you believe that a letter can be written in mathematical expression? Yes or no? What do you think? If you think that a letter can be written in mathematical expression, do you know what are you saying? You are saying that mathematics has a language. So, mathematical linguistic is there. Yes, mathematical linguistic is there, and that is when we study the mathematical aspect of language, how mathematical sign like plus, minus, equal to, definitely we are studying them in a shape of language. For example, when you say 2 added to another 2, result is equal to, so what are you doing? You are speaking a language. Also signs are there. Some short formation is there. But one way or another, mathematical expression, mathematical language is the shortest method of language. You can convey message through it. So mathematical linguistic is a field that studies the mathematical aspect of language. There are mathematical aspect of language too. That's why we are able to understand mathematics. Language is involved one way or another, and every aspect, every field of knowledge. So mathematics is also a field of knowledge. So when we study the mathematical aspect of language, we are doing what? We are studying mathematical linguistic. So student, psycholinguistic. What is psycholinguistic? Psychological aspect, when your mind, your brain, your thinking, your thoughts, your imaginations. When these aspects of human life are involved, the things become psycho. So, psycho aspect is the mental aspect. When we take the language on mental aspect, or we take the language on our thought processing, that become psycholinguistic. Psycholinguistic give you different thoughts, thought-provoking ideas, different theories that one way or another are related with thinking. So thinking is the base of psycholinguistic. When we think on the different aspect of language, on the teaching of language, or the learning of language, how language is learned, how language was learned in past, how language is processed. So these type of information be taken on the mental basis, that is called psycholinguistic. Psycholinguistic is giving you different idea to learn to teach language better. Students, some psychological factors that enable human to acquire, use and understand language, that all comes under the umbrella term psycholinguistic. So, ontogeny linguistic study child language acquisition. Ontogeny. Student, do you know that you have acquired the language initially? And further to it, what is the difference between acquisition and learning? This ontogeny it will help you to understand that how a child learn a language. The learning of the child at initial stage is called acquisition. So when you are acquiring a language, who is teaching you? Like you come here in university, you learn English language, you learn verb, subject, verb, object, how to join these together. Some vocabularies, you read newspaper, your vocabulary is enhanced. But what about the child? Child is home, your little brother, your little tiny sister, they are at home, but still they speak. Who is there to teach? Who is the master? Yeah, nature is the master. Nature is teaching. When nature is teaching in a natural way, in a non-formal way, when a language is learned, that is called acquisition. So in ontogeny linguistic, the acquisition of a language by a child, that is studied in this field of studies. Student, why study linguistic? Why linguistic study? Now, the study of linguistics is aimed at achieving two major objectives. What are these two major objectives? To study the nature of language and establish a theory of language. Student, if language is a phenomena, it's quite necessary to understand the nature of language, because language is one of the beautiful gift of Almighty Allah given to human, as I usually say, because it beautified your world. How easily you can convey your message to your friend. How easily you can, how easily I can teach you. Was it possible without language? No. Even online, if I don't language, what should I do? How would I do? So, the nature of language, how nature evolved, how the aspect of language evolved, how established theories, etc. One of the aim is this, that we study the language. Next aspect is to describe a language and all language by applying the theory established. Can we apply a theory made for one language or another, and so on? Different question can be answered through these two types of studies. Now, why study linguistics? A formal study in linguistics helps us evaluate and analyze human language through various angles. A major in the discipline helps us in understanding the different methodologies that are devised in the study of language, understand the world better, realize the scope and application of language, and so on. Student, why language is studied? Why language is actually understood? Why language devised different aspect for study and so on. So after it, famous linguists and their contributions to it, I already said in the start that we would see some famous linguists. Ferdinand de Saussure, he was a Swiss linguist who worked on structural principle of language. His ideas revolutionized the discipline of linguistics and gave part the way to many significant development in the field. Ferdinand de Saussure have structuralism theory. Edward Sapir is an anthropologist, linguist who worked on the genetic relationship of Native American language and brought advancement to modern theoretical linguistics. After it, there is Raymond Jacobson. He was a Russian American linguist who contributed to the establishment of the linguistic, pre-knowledge of linguistic, and so on. Some more linguists are also there. Noam Chomsky, one of the greatest scientists of language. He is American linguist, referred to as the father of modern linguistics. He contributed extensively to the discipline. Chomsky brought forward the theory of generative grammar, which is based on the biological use of human language. Then there is Leonard Bloomfield, an American linguist who led the development in structural linguistics. Student, this was all about today's class. I have a strong hope that you have understood many new aspects about language, and some aspect you already for some extent know. You have revised them. Thank you very much for being with me in today's class.